She stood at the gate in a wrinkled blue dress, clutching a crumpled invitation no one would read. They laughed. They called her delusional, said she didn't belong there. What they didn't know was that the wedding wouldn't begin without her, because the woman they had just thrown out wasn't a wedding crasher. She was the bride. And when the groom saw her, the world stopped. The estate loomed like something from another world. White marble towers, cascading fountains, and hundreds of guests gliding past velvet ropes in gowns that shimmered like galaxies. A string quartet played beneath golden lanterns swaying in the breeze. This wasn't just a wedding. It was an event of legend. Billionaire Julian Hale was getting married, and everyone who mattered was there. Politicians, CEOs, supermodels, socialites. Everyone, except the woman standing at the back gate in scuffed shoes and a pale blue dress that looked handmade. Her name was Amelia. She clutched a small invitation card in her hand, its edges softened by time and wear. Her hair was tied in a loose braid, a few wisps escaping with the wind. She didn't wear makeup, she didn't wear diamonds, but she stood there anyway, heart pounding, watching as one black car after another passed through the main gate, each passenger greeted by name, escorted in with smiles and champagne. She hadn't even tried that entrance. Something in her gut told her she wouldn't be seen, only judged. So she came through the side, the service road, past the hedges and garden walls, hoping someone, anyone, might listen. But when the first security guard spotted her, his brows pulled into a frown, and the second didn't even bother hiding his smirk. "Miss, this is private property. Guests enter through the front." Amelia held up the card. "I have an invitation," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. He barely glanced at it. "Looks fake. There's a dress code, ma'am." His tone sharpened. "No offense, but you don't exactly look like you belong here." She tried to explain, but he raised a hand, already calling someone on his radio. A younger staff member, a woman in a black uniform, stepped forward and offered a half-hearted smile. "Maybe you should head out, sweetie. You'll just get embarrassed in there. These kinds of events aren't for, well, you know." That line hit harder than any slap. Amelia looked past them, toward the glittering estate, toward the lights, the laughter, the man she once knew beneath all that shine. But her path was blocked, not just by uniforms and velvet ropes, but by perception itself. She turned slowly, her shoes crunching the gravel, and walked away from the gate. No one followed her, no one asked her name, no one knew that the woman they had just turned away was not only on the guest list, but that the wedding wouldn't start without her. Because Amelia wasn't just another hopeful intruder, she was the bride. Inside the Hale estate, everything gleamed with curated perfection. Crystal chandeliers dripped from vaulted ceilings like frozen tears, and rose petals floated on the surface of the swimming pool, arranged to reflect the initials J and A in looping gold script. Waiters weaved through the crowd, with trays of champagne and white truffle canapes. Conversations fluttered between talk of hedge funds and skincare regimens, each voice laced with a brittle kind of joy, the kind born not from connection, but from being seen at the right place, with the right people. But beneath the glitter, a strange tension buzzed. "She's still not here?" a woman in emerald green murmured, sipping her drink. "Julian's bride-to-be. No one's seen her." "Not a single photo online," another replied. "It's weird, right? He's marrying this mystery woman and won't even show her off before the vows." A man in a sharp gray tux scoffed. "I heard she's some distant European countess or something. Maybe she doesn't speak English, or maybe she's just not photogenic enough." Laughter rippled, sharp and amused, until a slender woman in a red satin gown leaned in, her tone laced with venom. "Or maybe she doesn't exist. You know Julian, he loves drama. Maybe this whole thing's a stunt." Elsewhere, Julian Hale stood near the bar, surrounded by executives and old money heirs, though his mind wasn't with them. He wore a tailored black suit that made even the most seasoned models look average, but his jaw was tense, his glass untouched. A childhood friend, Mason, clapped him on the back. "You sure you're not getting cold feet, Jules?" Julian offered a polite smile. "No." "Then where is she?" Mason teased. "You've got senators out there getting restless, and your mother circling the ballroom like a shark in heels." Julian's eyes flicked toward the entrance, unreadable. "She'll be here," he said quietly. "She always keeps her promises." Back in the foyer, the head of security approached Julian's mother, Evelyn Hale. an immaculately dressed woman with diamond earrings sharp enough to cut glass. He whispered something in her ear. Her smile faltered. She turned sharply. "What do you mean she was turned away?" "Ma'am, she didn't have credentials. She was in, well, a very informal dress. Looked like a nobody." Evelyn inhaled, then exhaled slowly. "Then you did the right thing. We're not running a charity ball. We're running a legacy." And just like that, the woman they had been waiting for, the one whose name was stitched inside every program, whose initials were carved into the ice sculpture, was now a ghost on the other side of the gate. All because she didn't glitter the way they expected her to. They still didn't know her name, but they would, and they'd never forget it. Julian Hale stood at the edge of the ballroom, like a king presiding over a kingdom built not on trust, but on spectacle. Cameras followed him discreetly, capturing his rare smiles, his poised posture, the effortless way he made a tuxedo look like armor. Everyone in the room wanted a piece of him. His investors wanted his signature, the media wanted his face, and the women. They wanted the fairy tale. But Julian's eyes kept drifting to the door, to the absence, to the silence where her presence should have been. His mother approached with a measured glide, every inch of her wrapped in silver silk and calculation. "Still waiting?" she asked, as if the word itself were an inconvenience. Julian's jaw tensed. "Yes." "Perhaps she misunderstood the time," Evelyn offered, though her tone said she doubted the girl even understood punctuality. "Or," she continued, "she got cold feet, and frankly, who could blame her? A wedding of this scale is overwhelming for someone of her background." Julian turned to her slowly. "Her background is none of your concern, Mother." Evelyn smiled like a blade. "Your name is, and it deserves to be preserved, not diluted." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was enough to send her gliding away, back into the crowd of chatter and crystal glasses. But Mason stayed behind, leaning closer with a note of concern beneath his usual mischief. "You sure about this, man? I mean, I haven't even met her. No one has. It's like you pulled her out of a dream." Julian gave a hollow laugh. "She pulled me out of one." Mason raised a brow. "That's serious?" Julian's voice softened. "She saved my life, Maze, literally, when no one knew who I was, when I didn't know if I'd survive the night. And she didn't ask for anything, not even my name." He paused, eyes fixed on the grand staircase. "I promised her something that night. I told her if I ever found her again, I'd never let her go." "And now?" Mason asked. Julian looked down at the ring in his pocket, then toward the towering doors. "Now, I just need her to walk through that door before the whole damn world realizes. I already lost her once." But Amelia hadn't walked away entirely. Not yet. Because just beyond the hedge-lined path, past the kitchens and the loading bay, she'd found an open side door and a kind-faced janitor who remembered her. The hallway behind the conservatory smelled faintly of roses and floor polish. Amelia moved quietly, avoiding the mirrored walls, her fingers brushing against the cool plaster like she was trying to steady herself from vanishing. The janitor, an older man with kind eyes and a faded name tag that read Thomas, had blinked when he saw her. "You," he whispered, recognition dawning. "You're the girl from the lake house." She had only nodded. He hadn't asked anything else, just unlocked a side corridor and said, "Godspeed." Now she stood in a service hallway lined with crates of crystal and extra floral arrangements, the laughter from the ballroom muffled through thick walls. She wasn't sure what she would do. Walk in? Confront him? Leave the ring and walk away again? But her feet carried her forward anyway, driven by something deeper than fear. As she turned a corner, voices floated around a bend, sharp, loud, and familiar. "I still don't get what he sees in this mystery girl," a woman sneered. Amelia paused. Julian Hale could have had anyone, a movie star, a senator's daughter, but instead, does he pick some ghost with no past, no fashion sense? What's she hiding? Another voice joined, lighter but crueler. "I bet she's not even that pretty in person. That's why she's never shown up. Maybe she's ashamed." Laughter followed. Amelia recognized the tone. Not just gossip, but the kind of mockery that pretends to be curiosity. It made her stomach tighten. She didn't know these women, but she knew their kind. She'd worked tables for them, handed them change, held open doors. She stepped back into the shadows just as the group turned the corner. Two women in velvet gowns, heads high, oblivious to the woman standing a breath away, listening. When they passed, Amelia exhaled and continued on, slipping through the kitchen unnoticed, dodging waitstaff and florists. Then she reached the hallway that opened to the main gallery, the entry before the ballroom. She could see everything now. The chandeliers, the string quartet, the platform for the vows. The guests were still sipping champagne, but no one noticed her. Not because she was invisible, but because she didn't belong to the image they had built in their minds. She took a step forward, and that's when she heard it. "Security! Over here! Someone sneaked past the side door." The same voice from earlier, sharp and smug. A woman in red silk pointed at Amelia from across the gallery. Within seconds, two suited men appeared, rushing toward her with forced politeness and stiff jaws. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us." "I have an invitation," Amelia said again, her voice clear. "I belong here." "I'm sure you believe that," one of them replied, already placing a hand on her elbow. "But this is a private—" Then a voice cut through the room like a blade. "Let her go." The entire ballroom turned toward the sound, and there, at the top of the staircase, stood Julian Hale. Silence fell like a dropped chandelier. The music died, the waiters froze. Every guest turned their head in slow motion toward the grand staircase, where Julian Hale stood with one hand on the railing, his gaze locked onto Amelia like no one else in the world existed. The guards who had been holding her arm stiffened, unsure, then slowly stepped back. Amelia didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. The gravity in Julian's eyes told the room everything they hadn't known, and everything they were about to regret. He descended the steps without looking away, his shoes echoing against the marble like war drums. And still, no one spoke, not even his mother. When he reached her, he didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need an explanation. He simply reached forward, gently took her hand in front of everyone, and whispered one word: "Amelia." And it was like a fuse was lit. Gasps broke the silence. A wine glass shattered somewhere in the back. Murmurs erupted across the hall. "He knows her? Wait, that's her? That's the bride? No, it can't be. She's wearing that?" But Julian ignored all of it. His voice was low, but carried across the ballroom like a verdict. "This woman," he said, "is the only reason this day means anything." And then louder, firmer, "This is Amelia, my fiancée, and my bride." The world tilted. Evelyn Hale's face drained of color, her fingers clenching around her clutch. Somewhere in the back, the woman in the red dress, the one who'd pointed Amelia out, stumbled as if someone had slapped her. Amelia swallowed hard. She hadn't expected him to say her name like that. Not in front of the world, not with reverence. But he had. And now they were both standing in the center of a storm made of whispers and disbelief. "You don't owe them anything," Julian said quietly to her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We can walk out. Right now." But Amelia lifted her chin. "No," she said. "I want to stay." Julian nodded, something proud and broken flashing in his eyes. He turned to the guests, his tone steel. "If anyone here has a problem with how she's dressed, how she came in, or where she's from, leave now." No one moved. "Good," he said. "Then you'll sit and you'll witness this." He looked to the musicians. "Start again." As the violins hesitantly resumed and the crowd slowly sat down in dazed confusion, one of the elderly estate staff leaned toward a younger server and whispered, "Amelia, that's the name I saw in the ledger, the one sealed 3 years ago. The private agreement. She's the girl who saved him." The young server blinked. "Saved him?" "From death," the old man said, nodding. "From being another rich corpse no one would have cried for." The boy looked at Amelia with new eyes. "And now she's saving him again," he murmured. But across the room, Evelyn Hale rose from her seat, not with anger, but with something else entirely. Fear. Because she had just realized the lie she thought would protect her legacy was already unraveling in front of all her powerful friends. Evelyn Hale stood slowly, her polished heels silent against the velvet carpet, but the room felt her rise like a shift in temperature. Her smile was tight, porcelain thin, and her voice dipped in sugar laced with arsenic. "Julian, darling, perhaps we should speak privately." Julian didn't even glance her way. "There's nothing private left, Mother. You made sure of that." Evelyn's jaw twitched, but she kept her composure, stepping toward the center aisle as if reclaiming ground. You can't possibly think this is the way. This woman, no background, no family, no credentials. She has me, Julian cut in, and the sharpness in his tone made even the quartet falter. He turned to the crowd again. Some of you came for the gala, some came to see me fall in line, but none of you came for love. She did, years ago, before the suits, the headlines, the name on the tower. She didn't know who I was when she found me half dead in a storm, and she didn't care. She saved me anyway, and I made a promise. His voice lowered, but the quiet made it more powerful. A promise I etched into a contract myself, a vow that I would find her again, and that when I did, she would be the one, no matter what anyone said. Evelyn paled. That agreement was never meant to be executed. It was never meant to be hidden, Julian fired back. But you buried it anyway, like you tried to bury everything that didn't fit your narrative. He stepped closer to his mother. You knew she came back. You intercepted her letter. Evelyn's hands clenched, but she didn't deny it. That silence was all the room needed. Amelia stood still beside Julian, her dress simple, her eyes calm, yet somehow she commanded more respect than every diamond in the room. A ripple passed through the guests. Some shocked, some scandalized, but a few moved. A gray-haired man stood from the second row. Mr. Hale, he said gently, that promise you made, it wasn't just to her, was it? Julian nodded. No, Mr. Arden, it was to myself, that I wouldn't become another rich man surrounded by liars who clap at anything golden. Arden turned to Amelia and bowed slightly. Then, ma'am, if you'll have us, we'd be honored to stay. One by one, others followed. A designer, a board member, even the head of the Hale Foundation. But Evelyn, she didn't sit. She turned her back, face burning, mask cracking. She looked at Amelia one last time with something bitter in her eyes. Not hatred, not even disdain, but a fear deeper than either. The fear of being irrelevant, of being forgotten by a son who had found something stronger than power. And as she walked out, the doors closing behind her like the end of a rain, Julian turned to Amelia and whispered, "You ready?" Amelia nodded, a soft smile blooming. "Now I am." The ballroom had never been so quiet. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Evelyn Hale's exit echoed like a storm door slamming shut, but Julian and Amelia stood unmoved at the altar space, not as rebels, but as survivors. A new kind of energy filled the room. Not the practiced elegance of power, but the raw tension of revelation. One of the elder guests, a white-bearded man with deep-set eyes and the posture of someone who had built empires, slowly rose from his seat. "Amelia," he said softly, tilting his head like he was searching memory, "may I ask, where did you grow up?" She blinked, hesitant. "Green Hollow, a little outside Monroe." The man's face changed. He turned to Julian. "Do you know what that means?" Julian narrowed his eyes. "I know it's the town near the old estate, the one I crashed near that night." The old man stepped forward. "Amelia," he said again, voice trembling now, "do you remember a woman named Josephine Arden?" Amelia froze. "Yes. She raised me for a while. I was fostered with her. She had a little rose garden behind the porch and—" She stopped. "She died when I was 15. The man looked down, visibly shaken. "Josephine was my sister." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Julian looked stunned. "That would make you her grandniece," the man finished, "and the only living blood left of the Arden line." Whispers bloomed like wildfire. The Ardens were one of the oldest families in the state, quietly powerful, deeply respected. They didn't parade their name. They didn't build tech towers or make fashion headlines, but they funded half the hospitals in the region. And now, Amelia, the girl they all dismissed, stood revealed not just as a savior and a fiancée, but as a legacy. The old man smiled. "My sister wrote to me once, about a girl with soft hands and a steel spine. I never found her, but she just found me." Amelia's voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't know." "You didn't need to," he said. "You were already royal, child. You just didn't need a crown to prove it." Across the room, the same guests who had laughed at her entrance now stared in awe, not because of bloodlines or connections, but because of the grace with which she stood there, unwavering, never bitter, even after the humiliation. Julian took her hand again, pride flooding his expression. "Looks like I wasn't the only one who underestimated you," he said. "Seems like I was the lucky one all along." "You always were," she replied gently, "but not because of who I am, because of what we survived." And as the musicians quietly shifted into a new melody, one not written for tabloids or tradition, but for truth, the couple finally stepped forward, hand in hand, into a wedding that no longer belonged to reputation, but to redemption. The altar had been arranged for aesthetics, floral arches designed by a celebrity decorator, lighting measured in degrees of gold, in seating that prioritized status over soul. But as Julian and Amelia stepped forward now, none of that mattered. The petals, the chandeliers, the programs embossed with names, they were all background noise to the moment everyone would remember. The girl once shoved out the gate, now walking up the aisle with her head held high. No veil, no diamonds, just a quiet courage that made people sit up straighter without knowing why. Julian didn't need to announce anything else. His presence beside her did all the speaking. When the officiant cleared his throat and nervously began, "We are gathered here today to celebrate." Julian gently raised a hand. "May I say something first?" The crowd went still again. He turned to Amelia, the ballroom fading into a soft blur behind him. "I've stood in rooms filled with power, wealth, applause, but none of it taught me who I was. You did. That night, you found me broken, unrecognizable, and you didn't flinch. You didn't ask what I had. You just asked if I was okay, and I wasn't. Until you." Amelia's eyes welled, but she didn't blink. "I didn't rescue you," she said quietly. "I just reminded you you were human, and in return, you reminded me I mattered, even when the world said I didn't." A murmur ran through the guests, uncomfortable for some, humbling for others, because somewhere in those words, many heard themselves. The officiant, voice steadier now, continued the ceremony. There were no dramatic pauses, no stage tears, no flashbulbs, just the vows, simple, sacred, real. When Julian slid the ring onto her finger, a band made not of platinum, but of brushed iron, reclaimed from a nail she once used to hang a lantern outside her cottage. Amelia let out the softest laugh through tears. "You remembered?" "I never forgot," he said. "This wasn't a wedding," one guest whispered to another. "This was a reckoning." When the words, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," were finally said, they didn't kiss on the performance. They held each other like they had come through fire and found shelter. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was reverent, the kind of clapping that said, "Thank you," without ever using the words. And as they walked down the aisle together, people didn't look at the gown or the hair or the guest list. They looked at the grace, the defiance, the kindness that had quietly conquered everything. In the back of the room, a journalist lowered her camera. "That's the real headline," she whispered. "Not the billionaire, not the wedding, her." And just like that, Amelia became something greater than anyone expected. Not a trophy bride, not a lucky commoner, but a symbol. Not of wealth, but of worth. By morning, the wedding had already gone viral. Not for the guest list, not for the luxury cars lining the Hale estate, not even for the billion-dollar venue, but for the woman in the powder blue dress who had been turned away at the gate, only to return and stand at the altar as the bride. The video of Julian Hale stopping the ceremony to defend her name had over 10 million views before dawn. But what caught the world off guard wasn't the drama, it was the dignity. Amelia's quiet poise in the face of public shame, her refusal to retaliate, her grace when she could have humiliated everyone who tried to erase her. That's what turned the narrative. Headlines shifted from "Who is she?" to "How did we overlook her?" And yet, while the internet dissected every second, Amelia stayed out of sight. She didn't post, she didn't gloat. Instead, she returned with Julian to a quiet coastal house, far from the towers of the city, where waves could drown out the noise of the world. She sat on the back porch, barefoot, holding a cup of tea while Julian sat beside her, their fingers intertwined like they had always been meant to fit. "They're calling you a queen," he murmured, scrolling past article after article. Amelia smiled faintly. "I never asked for a crown." "You didn't need to," Julian said. "You built one, out of integrity." Meanwhile, back in the city, those who had once mocked her were facing their own reflections. Evelyn Hale's reputation began to fray. Business insiders questioned her decision to withhold a legally binding agreement. Shareholders bristled at her efforts to erase a woman based on appearance. She stepped down from 3 boards within a week, The woman in the red dress, Danica Lorne, lost her ambassador role for a major fashion brand after the clip of her sneering, "She doesn't belong here," went viral with 10 million comments defending Amelia. And yet, Amelia remained silent. She didn't fire back. She didn't grant interviews. When asked if she wanted a platform, she said only, "Let my actions speak louder than anything I could say." It was Julian who suggested the foundation. "You've inspired too many people to disappear now." She nodded, and together they launched the Worth Initiative, a program dedicated to helping women from overlooked communities receive education, mentorship, and dignity in places where it's most often denied. The first donation came from the Arden Family Trust, now fully backing her as both heir and leader, but Amelia refused to wear designer gowns to the launch. She wore the same dress she wore at the wedding, cleaned and pressed, the seams still slightly uneven. "Why?" a reporter asked her gently. Amelia smiled. "Because it reminds me who I was before they let me in." And that was the truth no one could unsee anymore. She didn't need a palace to be powerful. She didn't need diamonds to be dazzling. Her crown had never been made of gold. It had always been made of grace. 1 month later, the city still whispered her name. Not because she sought attention, but because she redefined it. Amelia Hale, once just a girl turned away at a gate, now stood as a symbol of quiet defiance and unshakable worth. But to her, none of it mattered more than the small things. The way Julian poured her tea before his own. The way they danced barefoot in the kitchen to music no one else could hear. The way she still wrote letters instead of emails. On their first morning back in the city, she visited the bridal shop where it all began. Not in anger, but in closure. The glass doors opened, and the same attendant who had once laughed in her face blinked in shock. Amelia smiled gently. "I'm not here to cause trouble," the woman stammered. I saw the news. I didn't know." "That's the thing," Amelia said quietly. "You didn't ask." She left a single envelope on the counter. Inside it, a check large enough to fund free gowns for underprivileged brides for a year, and a handwritten note, "Make it easier for the next girl." Then she turned and walked out, her head held higher, not because of who she married, but because of who she chose to remain. The Hale family estate had since opened its gates not to celebrities or politicians, but to students, community leaders, and nonprofit organizers. The gala that was once designed to impress now hosts causes that matter. And on the first anniversary of that unforgettable wedding, Julian stood on stage beside Amelia and introduced her not as his wife, but as his North Star. "She didn't just change me," he told the crowd. "She rescued the man I was pretending not to be." But it wasn't until later that night, back in their room, that the truest moment unfolded. Amelia stood by the window, holding a velvet box. "I have something for you," she said. Julian opened it to find the rusted nail she once used to hang a lantern outside her tiny cottage. She'd had it polished, mounted, and framed behind glass. "This saved you that night," she whispered. "But you saved me every day since." Julian's voice broke. "You are everything I never deserved." She touched his chest gently. "No, you are exactly what I waited for." Outside, the lights of the city blinked like distant stars. But in that quiet room, with no photographers, no applause, and no masks left to wear, a woman who once walked home in the dark now slept beside the man who would never let her face another storm alone. Not as a stranger, not as a symbol, but as the bride they'll never forget. Because she never needed to be anyone else but herself. They crowned her with judgment. She answered with grace. They measured her worth by fabric and silence. But she rewrote the definition of power without ever raising her voice. And when the truth was revealed, that the girl they mocked was the woman he'd never stopped loving, the world didn't cheer for her status. It stood still for her strength. Because sometimes the most unforgettable brides are the ones who walk in alone and walk out with the world watching, changed.